How's it going, everybody? Welcome to LUMIX Live this week. As the title says, we're going to be taking this week to actually kind of address a bunch of the questions that I've seen come up regarding the recent firmware update that we have released for the S5 Mark II, the S5 Mark IIX, GH7, and the G9 Mark II. And kind of just walk back through maybe a little bit more detailed than my last video about how to set these things up, some of the settings that maybe go a little bit overlooked as far as the way you can customize some of this stuff, and ways that I have set my cameras up to utilize these different modes to basically get a little bit more use out of them for the general kind of photo and video capture that I do with it. So this is going to be a pretty interactive stream like we have normally done in the past. So if you have your questions and you want some clarity on something, be sure to drop it in the chat. Just make sure you tag at LUMIX USA. It's a little bit easier for me to see them, so I can kind of go through that. But I also have last week's comment section open, so I can go through some of the questions that I know I have gotten since that broadcast went up, to hopefully provide a little bit of clarity with it. But before we go into the stream, I want to remind everybody in the US about LUMIX Pro services. We have the Red and the Platinum tier available. Red is free. If you've purchased a LUMIX camera, just follow the QR code on the screen or the link down in the chat. Get yourself registered for it. It's free. Get you your 3-year extended warranty. And get you into the system in case you ever do have a problem in the future. You'd end up having the system already set in place. You already know where to go for service and support. But if you're someone who likes to prefer higher level service and support, if you're a working professional and you need your equipment in its best possible shape before every season, be sure to take a look at the Platinum series or the Platinum tier of our membership. That is a paid level service, but that gets you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs if you drop or break something. You also get access to a membership hotline, so if you'd rather speak to somebody instead of do things over email or chat, you have that option available to you. And then you can also have your cameras sent in for cleanings and service and stuff like that just kind of preventative maintenance kind of things for your equipment. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Links right below me down in the description, or you can use the QR code that's on the screen and get yourself checked out if you're in the US. If you're joining us from outside of the US, you can always take a look at the global link down in the chat, or down in the description. And you can see what's available within your region as far as LUMIX Pro services go. So with that, I see a couple questions or comments that have already kind of come in as well. And if you have a question outside of the firmware update as well, feel free to drop it in the chat because we'll also be able to go over some of that stuff as well. So this one came from Family. It says, not firmware update related. It's okay. Love the autofocus merge on my FZ80. Is there a way we can have that on an S5 IIX as well? That way I can do post-focusing camera. So on the FZ80 and the prior generation cameras, we had that mode called post-focus, which was a 4K or 6K, depending on the camera that you had, video functionality. Within the newer cameras, so on the phase hybrid system and newer, so that would be S5 Mark II and newer, that particular functionality is no longer available within the system. So basically, there's not really a way to do it in camera. If you want to do merged photography on something like an S5 II or a 2X, you're going to end up using something like focus bracketing and then using a software like Helicon or something along those lines to do your merged photography that way. Part of this is down to the fact that we've mentioned it before, but like the post-focus functionality and the 4K photo functionality were great when they were introduced, and they were solid for being able to get really fast frame rates and be able to go back in time and stuff like that. But that's because we didn't have a pre-burst functionality when it comes to the burst shooting. Now in the newer cameras, we have pre-burst, which gives you RAW and JPEG images. So in those cameras, those modes are basically redundant to a point. And then the post-focus functionality the overwhelming majority of feedback we got from users as we were kind of expanding further into the higher end cameras was really that people were doing this stuff in software, not in the camera. So certain stuff like that, as you change generations, especially in a case like this where we went to a totally brand new engine, it kind of explains why it's been out. New engine, we prioritize other things, and when people are telling us that there's not really a mode that they use or want to prioritize in the higher end cameras, you go and design based on what the users are telling us for. So does that mean stuff like focus stacking and things like that are never going to be something that we look at? Of course not. Just at this point, the overwhelming majority is that it's being done in software. So your focus bracketing is where that comes in. Let's see here. Orange says, thanks for the firmware update and love crop zoom feature on your G9 Mark II. Did not think I would use it as much, but honestly, it's been really useful. Yeah. And that's one of the things I actually want to kind of clarify here is the difference between crop zoom and hybrid zoom, because they are two separate systems and they work fundamentally differently. So we're going to talk about that in a little more detail in a bit for the demonstration in a bit. Let's see here. Great update. One thing missing is PDAF on full HD like the S9 and hybrid zoom and higher frame rates. Pixel to pixel works in 50p. Why not hybrid zoom? So there's a couple of reasons why hybrid zoom doesn't work. I don't fully understand every aspect of it. But at 60 frames per second, you have to remember that on the S5 II, S5 IIX, and on the S9, when you're in 60 frames per second, the sensor has to crop for 4K 60. So you basically, if you're already in Super 35 or APS-C, there's not really any room to do hybrid zoom at that perspective, because what hybrid zoom and crop zoom are doing when you're in video is specifically down to, if I say that I'm going to be recording in, say, 1080p, and I want to be able to punch all the way in, it has to have room to go for that. And from Super 35, there's not really much room to go for a hybrid zoom to happen or a crop zoom to happen. You'd be at like, a 1% crop or some number like that. I don't know what the exact number is. So that's one of the reasons. The other thing is that, image quality is always something that we take very highly regarded. So depending on whether or not it hits a benchmark that we have, whether or not we feel that system is going to be, as beneficial as just, versus doing it in post, those are some of the things that kind of come up and help guide whether or not certain modes can have that or not. It's partially one of the reasons why, and I mentioned this in the video last week about hybrid zoom in specific, why hybrid zoom is a full frame feature and not a micro four thirds feature, is down because the full frame, the Element Alliance, has the actual real-time focal length information being paired and sent to the camera. So if you notice on the newer cameras that have PDAF, as you make a zoom, and it's all on the L-mount system, you get a readback of what focal length that lens is at. That information is a critical piece of hybrid zoom because it's pairing the optical zoom with a progressive digital zoom for it. So yeah, it's kind of just how it is at this particular point. And despite the S9 being very, very similar to an S5 Mark II, there are subtle differences in the sensor themselves. So that also brings up a little bit of differences that you see there. PMFX, which full frame Lumix should I buy for uncropped 4K 60? Technically the only camera we have in the current lineup, if you want 4K 60 uncropped and your caveat being full frame there, would be the S1R. The S1R does do 4K 60 from a 1.1, which is about the same crop that every other manufacturer is doing when they say it's full sensor 4K 60. That camera has it, but remember that's a more photo-focused camera in the lineup. Max, why did they remove RTP? How would people doing 12 camera multicam now? Would you just say don't update? So Max, The removal and the change to security regulations within the RTMP, RTMPS, RTP, and RTPS comes down to a regulation that's been put in place in Europe, and my understanding is in some other places. So it's not necessarily that we wanted to do that kind of change to the cameras. It's that in order to comply, changes had to be made. I don't have the regulation offhand, but if you take a look at some of the European regulations that are involved with radio frequency and Wi-Fi and the way devices are connected, whether it is an internet connection or not, I recommend you taking a look at some of that information and kind of just reading through those regulations there. We are not in the habit of removing anything from the cameras unless there is a very specific reason for it. And in a case like that, there's a regulation in place, which meant in European regions, that's why RTMP has been removed. My understanding is you still have RTMPS. I would have to check with my European counterparts on that one. Obviously, because I'm based in the US, I don't really have any of those issues because we don't have those regulations completely here. But yeah, the security updates are to comply with regulatory changes that have happened globally. So, is MP4 Lite possible to transfer to auto transfer 10 gigabyte max versus 4 gigabyte? Love hybrid zoom. Thank you. If you can clarify what you mean by 10 gigabyte max versus 4 gigabyte, MP4 Lite is a mobile oriented version of OpenGate. So it is designed so that you can, in general, have a lighter weight file. Excuse me, that's why it's at 50 megabit per second versus the 150, 200, the higher bit rate MP4, well, in that case MOV files that you have. But it's also a compatibility thing. Depending on the device that you are working with as far as your phone goes, because the range of what phones and tablets people use is so great, there has to be some priority to making sure that the bulk of everybody that is going to be using the app has a relatively seamless experience between those devices. So MP4 Lite being designed as a 50 megabit MP4 file, which is a much more widely accepted file across various generations of devices, means that you get a much lighter file. When it comes to the overall file size, that's going to come down more to how long you want to wait for a file to transfer, because at that point, a 10 gigabyte file shot in MP4 Lite is going to be way longer than physically, like the timeline of that file is going to be way longer than, say, a 10 gigabyte MOV file that's running at a higher bit rate. The higher your bit rate, the shorter the time is to get to the same data size. But if you can give me a little information, mister, I can try to clarify on that. But it should be fine to transfer. To be honest, I don't do crazy long recording clips that I would be doing auto transfer for. If I'm using an auto transfer, it's usually that I'm doing like a 1 minute to 5 minute long clip, and that's about it. Outside of anything longer than that, I wouldn't do auto transfer. I would manually go in and pick the clips that I want to send over, or at that point, that's where I'm going to a more traditional workflow and using a laptop or a card reader or something along those lines to work on a bigger platform. I know tablets have gotten, like iPads and stuff, have gotten really, really powerful, and some of the newer, Android tablets are incredibly powerful for editing. But usually at that point, it would just be a more productive workflow when you start getting into some of these like multi-gigabyte files to just take the card out and do it. It's going to be faster than Wi-Fi, even on 5 gigahertz. It'll still be faster to do a hardwired connection there. And with iOS and with Android devices, you can always just plug your camera into your phone and tell it to run as a storage device, and you can offload them that way. You don't actually need a card reader for any of this stuff either. Dave says, This is sort of firmware related. I've seen online that S9 has phase detect AF in 1080 60p. I was wondering if this was added to the S5 II or 2X in the newer firmware. There's the system on the S5 II 2X uses the most appropriate focus system for the various modes that it's in. The sensors are slightly different between the S9 and the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX. There are very subtle differences into them. Outside of that, I don't really have much more information. FC, just want to confirm that image transfer to PC via Wi-Fi is not removed for US models. I would have to double check on that again. It's been a very long time since I've done that because of Frame.io. Frame.io is just a much more efficient way to do it, at least in my perspective. But I can check into that for you, FC. Let's see here. So a couple more comments come in here. But RTP was removed for everything. Yes, regulation. I am told from what I have seen, it is a regulatory reason why RTP is removed. Will changes be made in the future for constant preview that lags so hard on night or low light photography? We've talked about this before with constant preview. We have a very specific way that we do constant preview within our cameras. There is, if you're going to be doing low light photography, there is a different mode I recommend, and I'll show that to you in a second. Because I love doing night photography, and I agree the fact that we do shutter speed simulation as well, because we look at constant preview as you actually should be previewing the entire exposure. That means if you're going to be doing a 10-second exposure, it is constantly previewing what your shot is going to be. It's a very literal constant preview system. But I can show you a slightly different way that shows you a way to kind of get around that a little bit. Let's see here. Is any difference in image quality, MP4 Lite and MOV? The differences you'll see between MP4 Lite and MOV are not necessarily coming down to the wrapper that you're using. So MOV or MP4 is a wrapper. What you are seeing is a difference, and there will be some subtle differences between them, is that in the MOV formats, you're using a much higher bit rate. Higher bit rate gives you less, what people call macro blocking and stuff like that, less compression artifacts. So using like MOV and a much higher bit rate will get you a more malleable file. MP4 Lite being, again, designed as a mobile-oriented social media kind of concept that, you know, yes, you can use for other things, obviously. Your bit rates go down, which means it may not be as flexible as you can get in shooting full-blown MOV in something like the full 6K open gate modes here. Let's see here. Is X-Pan image format coming to the G9 Mark II? No. My understanding is no. The Micro Four Thirds cameras, because of the field of view issues, the sensor aspect ratio changes between 3.2 to 4.3. The 65:24 aspect ratio is a full frame sensor thing. You also look at, you know, various resolution reasons that come into it, and how things like especially in the new cameras, how things like the focus areas or the PDAF pixels are distributed across that aspect ratio. So if you want to do, if you want to have 65:24 in full frame, you've got it built in where it can tag, it'll shoot the JPEG as 65:24, or what people call X-Pan. And then your raw file gets tagged as to what that crop was. So when you bring it into software, it's cropping it properly. Otherwise, if you're on a Micro Four Thirds cameras, you have to manually either create guidelines for that or do it in software. From what I understand, the S5 II will force you into Super 35 mode when using autofocus APS-C lenses are attached. Is there a way to circumvent this to use Super 35 lenses on full frame, example Blazer Apex? No. There is a reason for that. I've gone over this before, and some people are going to disagree with me. Completely understand that. But the fact of the matter is that an APS-C lens, its image area is designed for a Super 35 image coverage, so the sensor size. All lenses cover a larger area than what the sensors capture. What ends up happening, and what you have to be aware of, is that those areas outside exhibit stronger optical problems than what they're designed for, because they are designed to cover a certain field of view. With our system, if you're using anything electronic or anything that communicates electronic, it's going to know that, hey, this is a lens designed for Super 35 or APS-C, and it's going to put the camera into that mode. I cannot recommend any of the other ways that potentially you could try to get rid of that. But yeah, that's just how it is. FC, I know we as customers cannot downgrade firmware, but can LUMIX Pro Service downgrade? I don't want to update firmware. I don't want to update firmware and found out the feature I need got removed. My understanding is no, the service center is not going to be able to roll a firmware back for you. Yeah. So, okay. Let's actually talk about some of these things here, and hopefully provide a little bit of clarity for some people. So the first thing I want to actually kind of talk about is that hybrid zoom versus crop zoom. I talked about this on the last recorded stream last week. But, as we're kind of looking at it here with hybrid zoom, this is a mode, and to be very, very clear, and I'm going to go onto my main camera for this one, to be very clear, because there's a lot of people online that are spreading incorrect information. It is a photo and a video-oriented mode. It is not designed to be better in one or worse in the other. It is a hybrid tool. It is perfect for photo and video, depending on your use cases. So with that being said, how does it work? In the video sense, hybrid zoom gets tied to the resolution that you're going to capture. Carol, I'm going to actually talk about this in a second here. Hybrid zoom uses the optical feedback of the lens you're using. So in this case, I have a 24-70 2.8. Uses the optical range that the lens moves, and you can see that being counted up on the bottom of the screen here. So 24 out to 70. It uses that information paired with a digital progressive crop to give you a magnification. Now, when you are doing this in video, the biggest thing about this is that it is highly dependent on the resolution that you are capturing at. So right now I have my camera set to full HD 24p. This is what would give you the farthest reach with hybrid zoom, because you're originating from a 6K sensor down to 1080p. And you've kind of seen this in the past where you can put it into pixel and you see how far that actually can let you zoom in. But in the older system, it's either it's full frame, APS-C, or pixel. That's it, right? So with the way this works, because it requires that ability to go from, whatever the main resolution is, in this case 6K, it needs to be able to go down to what the resolution is that you have the camera set to. So here in 1080p, you can see that I can turn my 24-70 into a 24-218. But if I come in here and I change my resolution to say, so let's do frame rate, 30p, since I broadcast in 30p and it works up to 30p. Let's change this to 4K. So I can let's change this to 4K 30p all intra. Hopefully my switcher doesn't freak. It didn't. Let's fix my shutter angle here so that we're back to a good shutter angle. So I have hybrid zoom still correct on. The only thing that I've changed is what the resolution is that I'm capturing from. So now we see as I make my zoom in, I can go to 109 degrees. Now 109 degrees gives me a really good, level of zoom while maintaining my resolution. This means that you have a protection so that the system is not going to run into a challenge where you are zooming in with digital further than what the actual resolution of the video output is that you're working in. So it makes it basically a fail-safe when it comes to the photography sense. What also works incredibly well with this is that when I change the camera into MP4 Lite, and luckily this one isn't one that changes it here, you see I've got 3.8, I've got 10-bit, 50 megabit per second, I'm in 30p. Well, now when I do this, I still also have hybrid zoom for an open gate light type recording. Now again, this works the same as the 4K because it's using 3840 pixels wide. So that's a 4K sensor width. So I have a ton of room to work here. Now, if I come in and I go to image area video, you notice that hybrid zoom is on, so I can't change the image area video. That's because when you look at a 3840 pixel wide, and actually I can probably do it this way. If I turn hybrid zoom off, and I come up here and let's change this to APS-C. See, APS-C punches in a decent amount, which means that now I am originating the recording from a Super 35 region of the sensor. The amount of pixels that are there for hybrid zoom is much, much less, so you would effectively not really get much zoom range with it at that point. I'm not going to have much range to actually use it. And then when you go to pixel, you can see there, APS-C, you have that much room. If I go to pixel, I only have that much more room. So if hybrid zoom was working in APS-C, you would literally only get a little bit more. And this is the same if I change this to, if we go back into MOV, and let's, we've got pixel for 4K 30. If I go to APS-C, again, you see that it's not that big of a difference. It relies on being able to take that full sensor width and scale down to a pixel-to-pixel region. Now, if I'm in the photography side of the camera, this is where it's quite different. In the photography side of the camera, and actually give me 1 second, because I forgot that I changed my camera to run on battery. So give me 1 second. I just have to plug in my cable. Is my USB cable. Come in here. This is the joys of when you keep moving stuff around. So I've moved a whole bunch of stuff around in my office and I forgot where my cable needs to go in. Remember to always run your cameras on continuous power supplies so that you don't run into problems like this. All right, USB power. Make sure that's on. We're good there. And we are good there. Okay, cool. All right. Camera's plugged in now. So, where was I? Hybrid zoom, yes. So when you're working with it, as a little bit of that recap, like I said, you have to make sure that you need the full frame because you need that full sensor width to be able to do it. APS-C, you're cropping into the sensor too much. It's another reason why in 4K 60 you don't have it because it's in Super 35. So yeah, just be aware of that. Now, I mentioned that there's also a difference here between hybrid zoom and crop zoom, and the side of the fact that this can also be applicable to photography. So when we talk about hybrid zoom in photography, there's subtle differences here. So in photography, you're not necessarily bound by the resolution of the output. You can be more selective of, how you want that to work. So in the menus, when you go into the set menu, we've given an option to say, well, what is the smallest size JPEG image you want when you're using hybrid zoom? By default, this gets set to XS, which is extra small. And in the menus, we tell you, XS is a 1920 by 1280 pixel image in 3:2. And this was added specifically for hybrid zoom. Most social media delivery, if you're going to be putting an image up on mobile devices, XS is more than enough resolution for the vast majority of phones, and the image looks perfectly fine. But if you're someone that's like, okay, I need to at least be able to get maybe 6 megapixel, maybe you're doing, bulk headshots, maybe you're working in a volume type scenario, and you want extra reach, but you're never going to need 24 frames per second, or 24 megapixels, you can set it to something like 6 or 12 and make that your smallest particular point. So for this demonstration, though, I'm going to keep it on XS. Now, the difference with the photo mode here is that I can, just like in video, I can do the crop focal length, the composite focal length, or I can leave it in crop magnification. But this is going to be recorded depending on the mode that you have the camera set in. So because I have my camera set for fine, which is just JPEG images, if I go in and I turn hybrid zoom on, you'll see that I can take that effect. It says it's going to affect after this image, after this is selected. I can take that effect and I can punch in. So I can get that, my 24 to 70 to 24 to 218. Now, your JPEG image is going to be encoded this way. So your JPEG image is live cropped to the resolution and the what you see in the viewfinder. When you want to do when you want to set this up for RAW, if you notice, if I go and say I only shoot RAW files, if I go in and I only shoot RAW files, hybrid zoom is disabled. The reason for that is because the way we handle RAW files, and I think a lot of cameras these days do it this way, your RAW files are always 24 megapixel. It's always 24, it's always optical, that is what it is. If I shoot RAW plus JPEG, even if I do RAW plus standard, what ends up happening is that the JPEG file can get that encoding for the hybrid zoom function. Once that's encoded, it means that your JPEG is going to be that resolution. What you see is what you get. But your RAW file, when you bring it into something like Lightroom, at least I 100% know Lightroom does this, it's going to automatically crop the photo, your RAW file, to what you were looking at in the viewfinder, but you still have that full resolution to work with. Just gives you a little bit more flexibility, but if you do shoot RAW and you want to be able to use this, you got to shoot RAW plus JPEG, but in cases like that, I'd say shoot RAW plus standard, because then you get the benefit of the RAW file being tagged with the crop that you've kind of seen in the particular view. Now, for those that are, say, wildlife, outdoor, kind of photographers, there's an added benefit here with hybrid zoom. It's that you can be taking something like a 60 to 600 millimeter. You could be using this with RAW plus JPEG as a way to make sure that you are capturing and filling the frame the way you want to fill it in your edit later. The vast majority of wildlife and sports photographers that I know are round-tripping their images into some kind of software anyway. I think it's relatively rare, not saying it doesn't happen, that those JPEGs would be, kind of used. But by doing it this way, you'll have that JPEG that if it happens to be like, hey, this is perfect, or if you're using real-time LUT in combination with it, you've got that file, it's good to go, you can deliver it. But your RAW file allows that functionality of it'll be tagged with how you shot it, so that you don't have to then go back in and think, well, how did I want to crop this? But you're also still not stuck with it. You still have that ability to keep the full resolution file of it. So, that's, in general, hybrid zoom. When we look at crop zoom is a different way of doing this. Think of crop zoom as a way to turn your fixed focal length lenses or your prime lenses into a quasi zoom lens. In video sense, this is great. It's really solid because this means that I can take my 100 millimeter macro lens, right? I can take that lens, I can turn crop zoom on, and I can just, through software, apply a digital crop to it. In photography, again, it's bound by what that output resolution is that you want to have for that particular image. So in this case, I can get it to go out to that 218 millimeter, and it would always permanently be that way. So if I leave my crop zoom here, so if I go in and say, let's change this so it's magnification, right? It's a little bit easier to understand. So if I have this set and I want to always apply a 2x magnification, that means that I can turn my 24 to 70 into a 50 to 140. So I've got basically a built-in software-based teleconverter for some cases. If I'm using a prime lens, it means that I can quickly just come in and make some subtle adjustments here, make some changes. You can go up to 3.1 times in magnification. And then in the video side, it gives you that functionality to be able to come in and say like, hey, I want to turn the crop zoom functionality on, and I just want to apply a overall general crop onto it. Again, you can change this between the magnification or the actual like composite. It all just depends on how you want to, kind of have it work. But when it's on again, I have that ability to give myself a punch in. Now it changes again because in video it's going to be dependent on what your resolution is and whether or not you are using the whether or not you are using APS-C versus full frame in that particular case. I've been talking a lot, so let me go back. I saw a whole bunch of questions come through. So, thanks for everything you do. Shot my first short film on MP4 Lite, edited on the run. Very cool. Cut. Without giving too much info, we don't talk about rumors or stuff like that. So, hey Sean, any idea why X-Pan isn't allowed in shooting in high resolution photos? Is this something that can be requested? If so, please do. Thanks. I asked about that actually years ago when we first released the S series. So we did the S1, the S1R, and the S1H. We've had 65 by 24 since then. We've had it for the entire lifespan of our full frame cameras. High resolution shot mode at that time was tripod based, and the stitching and everything required, needed the full information to do it. It was a very precise process. So we didn't have it. You could only be very limited in the crops that you were doing. In the modern cameras, now that we do have the handheld mode, you run into a couple of different problems with it. Some of it is down to maybe really just kind of a bit more about the processing side of the way everything works. So when you put the fact that high resolution shot modes in the camera, we are still the only full frame camera, to my knowledge, that does RAW, JPEG, plus the standard RAW, all at the same time, processed and stitched in camera, while also allowing the ability to do this handheld and also correct for motion. I believe maybe one other has kind of partially started to try to catch up to it, but they're still very handicapped in the way that it works. But with our system, some of the crop or some of the aspect ratios just aren't available. Either it's, pushing the bounds of maybe that's that extra level of the information needed to correct for everything isn't necessarily there because of the way it processes. The fact that JPEGs are still produced based off the aspect ratios and the way that system is tied means that high res isn't going to be available for it. So typically in that particular case, if you're going to shoot high resolution shot mode and you still want that X-Pan or that 65 by 24 aspect ratio, usually in a case like that, it's going to be either bringing it into your program, whether it's on your phone or Lightroom or Capture One, whatever it is, and then just blanket applying a 65 by 24 crop to it. That's just kind of how it is there. So, Steve, can you port over multiple frame markers for the GH6, please? MP4 Lite would also be welcome. I can pass it on. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Looks like people addressed the S1H is the only one in our lineup. Well, the S1H and the BS1H have optical low pass filters. Make hybrid zoom work with the focus ring of the prime lenses. It's an interesting concept. I saw your comment about that before, or someone's comment about that before. Have passed that on to the engineering team. I don't know how feasible it is, because I don't know what would be required for it, because yes, we do linear, non-linear, and we have very high precision sensors in there to be able to determine the positioning of that manual ring. I leave that up to the engineering team that know way more about how to actually make stuff work than anybody else. So, AI or other stuff to make hybrid zoom JPEGs look better. Any thoughts? I kept hitting enter. That I don't know. I know that hybrid zoom uses the full sensor width, and then it's digitally just scaling the image, cropping in as it goes. So, some of the looks in LUMIX Lab got broken with some of the updates. Any word on why or if that will be fixed? Some even work when raw in-camera editing, but not for baking in while shooting. I have not heard of that yet. I haven't experienced it on my side either, but I will bring it up to the software team and let them know to, hey, maybe take a look. One of the most important things, because Rhett, you make a really good point by bringing it up here. If you're ever running into problems or something that you think is a legitimate bug in the camera, don't, and this is a blanket for everybody, don't just go onto a forum and then throw it out there and hope or think that, we may see it there. We may not see it. Social media spots like that are not necessarily the right place if people are experiencing those kind of problems to report them. There's no tracking. There's no way to determine whether or not it's a legitimate issue, whether it's user error. There's no way to get back in contact with you. Yes, it's social media, but service and support teams are different than, say, like me, who's in social media and marketing and product, all that kind of stuff. And I can't always catch it. My counterparts in Europe won't always be able to catch them if you just post them in a social thing. The most important thing that you can do is, if you are ever running into a bug, report it directly to us. And this is true for all camera brands, all products in general. If you ever run into problems, report them directly to the brand. Let the brand know, hey, I've got this problem, because more often than not, they're either going to have a solution for you to say, like, hey, understandable, have you tried X, Y, and Z? And that may clear up the issue for you. But if there is a, legitimate issue or a bug or something like that, they now have that direct ability to work with you and understand your use case, understand your camera settings, what criteria were met to cause that problem. Troubleshooting issues has, in the modern era, has gotten very, very difficult, because people tend to just put their bug issues or something like that online and try to get a consensus from the public. And I'm not saying don't do that, but if you ever do have a problem, definitely reach out to your service and support. If you're in the US, you can reach out directly to the service and support, the customer service lines. It's another benefit of being in LUMIX Pro, is that you get an easier access to be able to submit problems and issues and things like that. You can do them here on LUMIX Live. My biggest request, though, is that if you ever do run into bugs or things like that, drop them as comments on the video. Mention them in the chat, and I'll always try to help you out. But drop them in the comments of the video afterwards. This way I can reference them later. And then we can typically reach out, because that's an area that I monitor. I can typically then reach out and be like, hey, we need a little more information from you if it's still kind of a problem. But yeah, that's one of the things, because, and this is across the board, I think, on all products. Any challenge you have, letting the brand know is kind of the first step, because otherwise the brand may or may not ever see it. Fully depends on whether or not someone happens to be looking at that, channel, that chat, that, Discord or Reddit or Facebook or whatever it is. There's a lot of ifs when it's posted that way. So yeah, let's see here. 3.8K resolution in 3:2 aspect ratio is badly needed with 422 in other better files as well. It's more useful than 6K. I can understand. Yeah, I can understand. Where did the other one go? Is there a possibility to have virtual custom buttons like settings in camera, so long press would give a 3 custom button menu to extend the settings in the S9 because it has less buttons? I have asked that before. Is there a way to do, like, you know, kind of expanded, where it's like under certain conditions holding a button longer or stuff like that? From what I've been in conversations with, it's a heck of a lot harder than it sounds, especially when you're looking at camera processors are dedicated processors for image processing and some menu control. They're nowhere near as powerful as what you see in some other, you know, kind of more specific devices that are designed from the gate to do that. So, but yeah. Sometimes on my S5 2X, when I turn it off and on, it automatically connects to LUMIX Lab. Sometimes I have to disable and enable the Bluetooth on the camera. Am I doing something wrong? No. In some cases, one of the things that you have to check, because I have run into this before. Bluetooth is not a bulletproof solution for connection. There are a lot of tools that have made Bluetooth very reliable for auto reconnect, and I would say that our auto reconnect is, for the greater part, a very reliable auto reconnect. But there can be things where if your phone is doing something else with Bluetooth, if you've got multiple Bluetooth things connected to your phone, like I always have my watch connected to my phone. If I had just been in my car and my phone is my wife's car, you know, the phone's trying to connect to the Bluetooth, it could take me 10 minutes to connect to my radio in the car. Sometimes that kind of stuff can happen. It shouldn't be happening regularly, though. Powering on and off shouldn't cause a problem with it. I would double check like permissions in the app with your phone. Make sure like nothing's being put into a sleep state. Just double check that kind of stuff, because a lot of times, more often than not, the problems that come to mobile device apps for cameras, and I think this is fair to say for all cameras or all brands, more often than not, it's a setting on the phone or a permission on the phone that, or a static, like a state of the phone that causes a potential delay in some of that stuff. So, I'll send you a few examples. Thanks, Rhett. That's perfect. Best feature to be added on hopefully current cameras would be EL zone. Interesting. So, let's see here. DM. Upgrade S5 2X to film 50/60 with the entire sensor. It doesn't seem right to me to use APS-C when it's a full-frame camera. So the sensor that we use in the S5 II, S5 2X, and the S9 is incapable of doing full-width 4K 60p 16:9. It doesn't have the readout mode to do it. So, Max, if I can make a suggestion, they should enable some sort of advanced mode that allows you to re-enable RTP with a disclaimer and warning, even in some hidden menus, because that's one of like 4 features why someone will buy an S5 2X. So I vehemently disagree with you on that's one of like 4 features. There's many other reasons why people would choose an S5 2X over an S5 II. However, as far as what my understanding is, the regulations that are in place, or that are going in place, mean that it's not about making you aware of this or whatever. Certain frequency, certain regulations dictate how products can be made. It doesn't matter whether or not we want to be able to do it or not. So, Max, I encourage you to go read about the regulations. If I had them on hand, I would let you know which ones they are, but I know there's an EU regulation about it that outlines what it is. Yes, I would highly recommend that. There are, in cases like that, there are some times where it is out of the company's hands to even be able to do some of this stuff. So, yes, I encourage you to read up on that. Okay, so I want to jump back onto the camera real quick because I wanted to talk about the frame markers again really quick. Max, that's why I'm encouraging you to read what the regulations are as to why we had to remove them. My understanding is that if you read the EU one, it will be more clear for it. So we're going to stop that conversation now. So I wanted to talk about the multiple frame markers here. So when you take a look at frame markers, we mentioned that we've added multiple frame markers into many of these cameras. And just to be very clear on how this stuff works, like what you have with it, right? So you've got up to 3 of them. You've got the ability to change the frame colors, however you want to have them set up so that you can see them more clearly. You also have this live view frame adjustment. This is that mode if you want to be able to tap on the frame guides on the back of the screen, move them, resize them through the touch screen. You have that functionality. But I saw a number of comments online about how multiple frame markers or frame markers in general are great. Having them in the camera, it's cool, but it's cumbersome because if you ever wanted to change them, especially in, before we did multi-frame markers, if you wanted to change them, it was very hard to, have to menu dive back in, change it, reposition it, all that kind of stuff. And if you don't have access to the touch screen, it can be a little cumbersome to do it. So we have 2 functions now for the custom function for this. So if I press and hold the right arrow here, you can see that I can scroll down and I can select frame marker, but I now have 2 options here. I have frame marker, which allows me to toggle them on and off. And then if I go to my bottom arrow, you'll see I have frame marker, and then I have my change size and position. So here, I can now just tap on the down arrow, and I can be moving and toggling the frame guides however I want them using the actual hardware buttons. Now, you can use the rear or front control dial, which would be your ISO or not ISO, your shutter speed or aperture normally is what you'd control them, to size them up if you don't have access to being able to tap on the rear screen. And then you can use your joystick to move it in any direction that you'd want to be able to send it out. Still, you press the Q button to be able to reposition these, to change them, to move between the various different frame guides that you have. And then you can fully customize it. Now I have it set so that when I press to the right, it'll apply them. Press to the right again, it disables them. If I press down, I can reposition all of them, so I can have it set, ready to go. Or if I don't always want to have them up, but I want to be able to reposition it, say at the beginning of the shoot, but still kind of keep myself open and not have to, always look through the crop lines, I can do all my repositioning, and then when I come out of it, they're turned off. So you get a lot of flexibility with it. And then on top of that, within the frame markers, you do have that frame mask. So I do have full ability to say, hey, I want to completely block out everything else that I'm not, focusing on. So if I move my 9x16 around here, you see that it'll only affect the areas that are covered over. It can make being able to frame and kind of organize how you want your shot to look for your post edits really, really straightforward and simple here. Let's see here. Joined the Discord. Great initiative. I don't know if other brands have Discords and communities like this, but things like this make me love the brand and the updates. Yeah, if you don't know, we do have a Discord. It's Matthew Danew built the Discord. We have jumped on board to support it, so I encourage you to go take a look at it. We have links in our social media, our other social media platforms, or you can take a look at Matt Danew's YouTube channel and get links to the Discord over there. Yeah, I encourage everyone, come over there, take a look. If you love Lumix cameras, it's a great place. All Are there any plans yet to speed up your focus bracketing or bracketing in general to finally make use of the larger cache? I'll leave another comment on the video. Yeah, I'm not fully sure. But yeah, definitely leave that in the comment section below, because then I can follow up with something like that a little bit later. S5 Mark II can do raw output with DMW SFU2. Yes, it can. Yeah, so if you have a baseline S5 Mark II, you can pick up the SFU2 code. That enables RAW over HDMI, so that will let you go do ProRes RAW to Atomos devices or Blackmagic RAW to the Video Assist 12Gs. Let's see here. Join the Discord. Okay. My thing jumped here before. That was EL Zone. Sweet Lumix merch without having to go to a certain store in Tokyo. Yeah, merch is one of the things that it's regional. I know if you ever happen to go to Tokyo base in Japan. Sorry, my monitor just turned off. Oh, there it goes. Sorry, everybody. Today just is not cooperating with me when it comes to power. Hopefully you can all hear me. Give me a second. There we go. Okay. My UPS decided to run a power cycle test, and it turned my display off. Yeah, so there is the LUMIX base in Tokyo that has merch that you could buy. In the US, we're still going back and forth on how or if we want to do merchandise and how that would go as far as like LUMIX shirts. Usually, if you ever see this kind of stuff, recommend trade shows that we'd be at. These are usually what we end up wearing for trade shows. So, yeah. At that point, stuff's usually not sold. But the more you ask us, the more information it gives us to be able to go tell people on our team, like, hey, we really should offer merch. Is there any image quality difference between S&Q mode and the equivalent high frame rate in normal recording? Yes, there will be. If you are, if your camera, has 120 frames per second in slow and quick, as well as a native 120 frames per second mode, so let's take the GH7 as an example. The GH7 in the actual native 120 frames per second mode, so 4K 120, is running at a higher bit rate, and it is a proper every frame 4K 120 frames per second. If you look at slow and quick mode, while in all the modern cameras, almost all the modern cameras, you have 10-bit modes now for slow and quick, which is the variable frame rate functionality. Your bit rates are usually lower, and you're over and under cranking the sensor based on the output frame rate that you want to go for. So if you've got a 150 megabit per second or 200 megabit per second native 4K 120, that is 4K 120, 150 to 200 megabits per second for the whole thing. Slow and quick is going to be, say, 24 frames per second, and maybe that's going to be at 100 megabit per second. Well, that's now for the 24 frames per second, because that's the file you're going to get. The sensor is being overcranked to record at 120 frame and then slow down into the 24. You can get some image quality differences between it. A lot of it is going to come down to depending on what you need the shot for. If you're looking for ultimate fidelity, highest overall image quality, it will always be better to record in a native resolution or a high frame rate instead of a variable frame rate or a pre-slowed down piece of content. Think of them as slow and quick is a great way for speed in production. Your high frame rates are more for maybe a little more deliberate capture, where you know you're going to be going into post and kind of working with it. That's how I typically address the two of them. I'll use slow and quick for things where it's like, I really don't need to ever really push this file too much in post. I'm not super worried about it. Maybe it's only going to be delivered on social media, and it's perfectly fine. If I'm doing anything where like I really know I need to be able to fit this in with, 4K 60p full-blown high-quality footage, I'm going to shoot it in the native frame rate and then do it that way. So, is it possible to have each assignable button have 2 functions? Yeah, we had, was it you that asked that question before? Yeah, I think someone asked that, or you asked that before. It's something that we would, kind of always look for, and like want to be able to do that. But my understanding is that it's a bit more complicated to do that than just being able to do press and hold for 2 separate functions. Orange. I really like the orange and silver color S9. Are there any firmware update issues if I buy a JDM camera and use in the United States? No, I mean, the firmware update is going to be fine. Just remember that camera is going to be recognized as a Japanese camera or whatever other market you bring it in, and know that you don't have a US warranty with it if you ever bring it into the US. Okay. We are at 2 o'clock, and unfortunately, I do have to end as close to normal time as I can today. Next week is going to be a recorded stream. Is it next week? Let me double check my calendar here. It's either next week or the following week is going to have to be a recorded stream. No, not next week. The following week is going to be a recorded stream. I am unfortunately going to be out on some personal time. So next week we will be live again. So definitely tune in. We'll be, I'm still working on exactly what I want to cover next week. But if you have certain topics that you are very highly interested in, you want to see covered, drop them in the comment section afterwards. And I can consider covering those next week. But in 2 weeks, so on the 13th, unfortunately that one will be a pre-recorded stream just while I'm out. And then we should be back to regular scheduled streaming on Thursdays. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you for all your amazing questions, your comments. Remember, if you have recommendations or you have questions that we didn't get to, drop them in the comment section after the video is posted. This way I can reference to them later. If there are issues that you're running into, drop them into the comment section as well. It's just easier for me to track and be able to kind of report that kind of stuff up. Outside of that, yeah, we will be back. If you like the video, give a like. If you like the conversations, give us a like. If you don't subscribe already, hopefully consider subscribing to the channel. Yeah, be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. right here on LUMIX Live. Take care, y'all.